Hi, everyone. I'm Lauren Walker, the Manager of Athlete Development here at USA Volleyball. And today I have the privilege of being joined by Tim Pelot, who is the Senior Strength and Conditioning Coach at the USOPC. So Tim is here to join us today to talk a little bit about the maturational development of our young athletes as they move through those club years. So pre-collegiately, what do we see with our athletes in terms of their physiological development? What type of physical training do we need to take into consideration during this age and time period? Thanks for joining us, Tim.
Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to the topic.
But as young athletes enter into club sport, maybe for the first time, what are some key physiological considerations or maybe physical competencies that we need to think about as a coach?
Well, I think when we think about, volleyball requires the body to use the physical infrastructure. It requires the use of all joints and muscles. And in order to use those, we need to have, when people use the word strength, this is creating common lingo here. Strength in this context is not strength and let's go to the weight room and work on strength. Strength is defined by being coordinated in any sort of tasks. There are people, boys, girls, adults, that don't have strength to do a body weight squat. Now that's strength. Now it's not weight room strength. It's just the ability to be coordinated under our own system, our own mass. And I think the sport of volleyball is really amazing because it is so complex. When I think complex, it requires a good volleyball. Good skills require the ability to use knees in full ranges of motion. We have to drop and dig. We have to sprawl. We have to pass. We have to lower our center of gravity down low. We have to move lateral planes, linear planes. We have to move in all contexts and on all degrees of motion. And oftentimes, athletes who lack the ability to be coordinated under their own weight to go into those positions are the ones that are most at risk for injury. They're the most at risk of faulty technique earlier on in a practice and earlier on in a game. And they're most at risk of, let's say, technique, but that leads to poor motor patterns, and then we start to grind in and imprint poor patterns. And it's not because they don't know what they need to do, because the brain learns, and the competency of our brain is very different than our physical competency. And so just because they know what they need to do doesn't mean they can do that task. And if the neurological system is exhausted, even though they know what they want to do, they may not be able to do it to support the movement. It's when it makes me think about the multi-sport athlete is an interesting content here to talk about with when athletes engage in multiple different sports. And this is like beating a drum or beating a dead horse here, but it's just the idea of the increased exposure to different movements, to different stimulus, asking for coordination in different planes at different speeds and different ranges of motion. And that's really what we're trying to talk about. I think if you see, and there's some really good research on there was a paper in 2006 that talked about how teens tick, I think is the title. And if anybody's interested, you can look it up. But it talks about the proliferation of nerves and how during the ages of 6 and 9, the brain literally sends out. It just develops nerves in a way that it's kind of like a whole prairie full of flowers, and it just blows up. And then after certain ages, if those nerves that innervate those muscles are not used, there's something called synaptic cleft. The synaptic cleft, there's a cleaving process where the synaptic clefts just get cleaved, and then the ability to use that nerve is gone. And so this idea of early on exposure to multiple types of stimulus, multiple movements, different planes, different speeds, different ranges of motion, different tasks, motor tasks, rolling, tumbling, just all sorts of things, lunging, squatting, all sorts of movement. It requires the activation of nerves before you might not have them anymore. It doesn't mean that you can't be great. It just means that you might be limiting your ability to get access to some nerves that that will go away if you don't use it. You don't use it, you lose it. And in this case, there's some really powerful research out there on this stuff.
I like what you moved into there, this idea of when we consider the benefits of movement really young and how that proliferates into movement as we age. Um, One of the things that I think we see, unfortunately, with the youth sport culture is more of an emphasis on specializing early. Um, and we don't oftentimes, I think, get good enough um, marketing out there, getting good enough education out there as to why diversification is so important. And you were just talking about it from an in-depth nerve level, right? Is we're getting this sprout of nerves at that 6 to 9 level, and are we losing it then if we're specializing, or are we able to cultivate more pathways by diversifying as a younger athlete? So maybe can you explain a bit more about what some of the benefits are for us physiologically if we maintain that diversification at that younger age?
Yeah. Wow. I live this in my daily life, and I have children that play multiple sports. And when I think about diversification, it is not easy. It's not easy for lots of reasons, but as a parent, it's really hard. It takes a lot of work to do that. And some parents may not have the time or be willing to put up with the challenges that it creates, because it's easy to talk about this topic, but if I am having my child participate in multiple sports and I have to pick what sport they're going to go to on whichever night, and then I miss one sport because I'm going to another sport, what does that do to my kid's perspective from that coach? So it's not I have to just bring it up. It's just not easy. And so I think, but what happens is if you're playing the long game, nobody goes to the golf course with just a putter, right? That's a short game, and so nobody does that, because the reality of it is that you're going to have a par 5 and you're going to have to shoot out from 100 yards. And so, but if all you think about is playing the short game, well, you're really only going to be playing mini golf. But if you want to play real golf, you got to bring a whole bunch of clubs with you. And so you need a driver. And if we're thinking about a driver, that means you're going the distance and you're thinking more long term. You're thinking 5 years out. You're thinking 10 years out. And in that means that you have to be willing to put up with a little bit of friction from coaches. You have to be willing to put up with a little bit of moving kids around from different parks to different clubs to different gymnasiums to different pools, maybe multiple times a week. And it's hard, but if you're doing it for the purposes of 5 years, you're setting up the stage. You're a stagehand. You're building. You're getting ready for something great, and it might not be so great in the meantime. And that's the challenge of multi-sport. But to going back to multi-sport, the ability to use your trunk, to twist your trunk, if that is ability for somebody, for example, if I'm a volleyball player and I'm thinking about disassociating my hips from my shoulders, nobody wants to hit with just their shoulder. And if you do, you're going to have a lot of shoulder pain and you're not going to have a lot of power. So you're probably going to be injured. But a really great way to learn how to disassociate, well, maybe you have a lacrosse stick in your hand and you start learning how to twist. And now what's happening is you're turning the power from the hip through the trunk, through the shoulder, and then that gets transferred to the hand. Or a baseball player who knows how to do, or a hockey, or the ability, and maybe not so much volleyball, but the ability to box out a basketball to a soccer to a lacrosse. There are skills when it comes to leveraging and using and positioning your body that transcend. These are movement qualities. The ability to have a good, stable stance. In basketball, if you're in the paint and let's say you need to have a good, stable stance on defense, just the ability to understand and hold load, put tension through the system. There are skills that I see volleyball coaches try to teach that other sports, just having them do, would do on its own. And you wouldn't need to have an athlete doing reps after reps after reps and getting smoked. And it's just like, oh, you know what you could do? You could try to just start twisting, golf, whatever the case may be. And I'm just going from a disassociation. The idea of going from the foot to the knee to the hip to the shoulder through the spine is something called a kinematic sequence. The ability for the body to leverage and create kinetic energy and transfer it through the entire chain instead of it just being so segmented into a shoulder or into a knee. And that's when you start getting a lot of injuries. And so going back, learning how to twist and tumble and rotate. Kids from 3, 4, 5, 10 years old tumbling and doing body weight movement in the form of gymnastics and rolling and tumbling are really helpful because there's just connections that are made with spatial awareness, kinesthetic awareness of where, and proprioception, which is joint control. Those things happen organically. It doesn't need to be taught in a very linear, progressive model. It just happens, which is pretty fun. And so I don't know if I kind of touched on that or too much or went a little bit off kilter on that, but that's just some thought processes. Yeah. And I would maybe add one more nugget on that is, we talked about sport specificity quite a bit. And, there's nothing wrong with specializing in a sport. And I think it gets a bad rap. And the way that I spoke about it earlier, it was like, oh, well, it's not good. Well, no, it's okay. As long as the athlete is getting exposure to different movements in different ways, which can happen through a very comprehensive, like a strength and conditioning curriculum. Mm-hmm. And so, which will challenge them and create these different torques or different tensions and different ranges of motion. And it is comprehensive. And so it's injury preventative. It's challenging the neuromuscular system. And so sport specificity, as long as the athlete's excited about it. Because sometimes you don't want, well, my kid, they're just not excited about other sports. Well, that's okay. But they're only excited about this. Well, you don't want to take them away from something that they love. Yeah. But you also need to protect them from being hyper specialized. And you do that through other means that's only going to support them in their specialization, if that, so to speak.
Absolutely. And I appreciate you making that point because I think that is a great one. That it's not bad to specialize, but we also should be acting in protective manners for our athlete as they're in that. Perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Tim. Really appreciate all of your expertise.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. It's such a great topic to talk on, and it's fun to talk about it, so thank you.